They Cloned Tyrone is not just a movie, it is a mirror held up to society. On the surface, it looks like a stylish sci-fi mystery set in a familiar neighborhood. But beneath that surface lies a powerful social allegory, one that quietly asks an uncomfortable question. What if control does not look like chains anymore? What if it looks like routine, comfort, and repetition? From the very first scene, the film invites us into a world that feels both familiar and unsettling. Time seems blurred. The environment feels stuck. People move through their daily lives as if following a script they never agreed to read. And that is exactly the point. The story suggests that manipulation does not always announce itself. It hides in systems, habits, and cycles that feel normal because they have existed for so long. This is a story about hidden structures of control, not through force, but through influence, through what people consume, what they listen to, what they eat, and what they are taught to accept without questioning. The film challenges viewers to think beyond individual choices and look at the systems shaping those choices in the first place. Who benefits when communities stay distracted? Who profits when nothing ever changes? What makes They Cloned Tyrone so effective is that it never lectures. Instead, it plants ideas and lets them grow in your mind long after the screen fades to black. It turns science fiction into social commentary, using symbolism and storytelling to explore themes of identity, conformity, and awareness. Before we go deeper into the hidden meanings, the symbols, and what this film may really be trying to say, take a moment to support the channel. If you enjoy thoughtful breakdowns, deeper analysis, and stories that make you see familiar worlds in a new way, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you do not miss what is coming next. Now, let us break the illusion and step into the story they did not want you to question. One of the most subtle yet powerful choices the film makes is the way it collapses time. Nothing in They Cloned Tyrone is clearly anchored to a single decade, and that confusion is intentional. The streets feel like they belong to the past, yet smartphones light up the screen. Conversations reference modern technology and recent political moments, while fashion, furniture, and entire neighborhoods seem frozen in another era. This is not a stylistic accident. It is a storytelling device designed to make the audience uneasy, because the world on screen refuses to move forward, even though time itself clearly has. This distorted sense of time reinforces the film's deeper argument. Oppression does not need to reinvent itself to survive. It evolves just enough to remain unrecognizable while repeating the same patterns. What changes are the tools, not the outcome. The characters live in a cycle that feels permanent, where yesterday looks like today and tomorrow promises nothing different. Their environment sends a quiet message that progress is an illusion, that history may change its language but not its intent. By blending past and present, the film mirrors how social conditioning is passed down rather than erased. Generations inherit not only neighborhoods and habits, but expectations, limitations, and roles written long before they were born. The characters are not simply trapped by circumstances. They are shaped by routines that feel natural because they have always existed. This is why the film never emphasizes a specific year or historical event. It wants the audience to recognize the pattern, not the timestamp. The repetition becomes especially unsettling when paired with the idea of cloning. Clones are not just copies of people, but copies of lives, behaviors, and outcomes. The same arguments happen, the same jobs are taken, the same struggles repeat. Individual faces may change, but the system remains intact. The film suggests that when environments are engineered to stay stagnant, people inside them are quietly conditioned to believe this stagnation is normal. Over time, resistance feels pointless because the world appears unmovable. What makes this approach effective is that it reflects real emotional experience rather than abstract theory. Many communities feel suspended in time, watching the outside world advance while their own circumstances barely shift. New technologies arrive, new language enters the culture, yet the underlying conditions remain familiar. The film translates that feeling into visuals, sound, and atmosphere, creating a setting where progress exists everywhere except where it matters most. This temporal blur also connects directly to the film's larger message about awareness. When people cannot clearly see when the problem started, they struggle to imagine when it could end. If oppression feels eternal, it becomes easier to accept it as fate rather than design. The film quietly challenges that assumption by showing that repetition itself is evidence of control. Nothing repeats this precisely unless something is maintaining it. By refusing to separate past from present, They Cloned Tyrone denies the comfort of distance. It does not allow the audience to dismiss what they see as a problem of another time. Instead, it suggests that the mechanisms of control have simply learned to dress differently, to sound more modern, to blend in more smoothly with everyday life. The result is a story that feels unsettling not because it is unfamiliar, but because it feels too recognizable. In this way, the film transforms time into a character of its own, one that loops, stalls, and resets whenever change gets too close. It reminds us that history is not only something we study, but something we inhabit. And until the cycle is recognized for what it is, it will continue to reproduce itself, generation after generation, quietly convincing each new group that this is simply the way things have always been. Up to this point, the world of They Cloned Tyrone feels strangely stagnant, as if time itself has stalled. The neighborhood repeats the same rhythms day after day, and life moves forward without ever truly changing. Then Fontaine dies, not metaphorically, not symbolically, but violently and without ceremony. His death should be the end of his story, the kind of ending the environment has been quietly promising all along. Instead, it becomes the moment where the illusion begins to crack. When Fontaine wakes up the next morning, unharmed and unchanged, the film does not rush to explain what has happened. It allows confusion to settle in, both for Fontaine and for the audience. His resurrection feels wrong, not triumphant. There is no relief, only a growing sense that something has interfered with the natural order of things. Death, the one certainty in a controlled and repetitive world, has been quietly overwritten. This is the first undeniable sign that the cycle holding the neighborhood in place is not just social, but engineered. This moment connects directly to the film's fractured sense of time. If the past and present can exist simultaneously, then life and death can also lose their boundaries. Fontaine's return reveals that repetition is not just cultural or generational. It is literal. Lives are being reset, roles reassigned, and outcomes preserved with mechanical precision. The neighborhood is no longer just stuck. It is being maintained. Driven by unease rather than heroism, Fontaine begins to notice details that once blended into the background. A black SUV appearing too often, people behaving as if nothing unusual has happened, conversations that feel rehearsed. What once felt like coincidence now carries intention. The ordinary world becomes suspicious precisely because it refuses to react. This indifference is what pushes Fontaine, along with Slick and Yo-Yo, toward the truth. The investigation is not sparked by curiosity, but by disbelief. Something that should have mattered did not matter at all. The discovery of the underground facility transforms that disbelief into confirmation. Hidden beneath familiar streets is a space that feels detached from time entirely, sterile and artificial, filled with systems designed to observe, influence, and replicate. The contrast is deliberate. Above ground, life appears chaotic, disorganized, and stagnant. Below ground, everything is structured, monitored, and controlled. The disorder of the surface is not a flaw in the system. It is the product of it. The cloning experiment reframes every repetition we have already seen. Fontaine's resurrection is no longer an anomaly, but a function. The neighborhood's inability to change is no longer tragic coincidence, but design. Individuals are not failing to escape their circumstances. They are being returned to them. The facility exists to ensure that certain patterns never break, that specific environments remain predictable and manageable. What makes this revelation unsettling is how quietly it has been operating. There is no dramatic takeover, no visible authority enforcing control. Instead, the system hides beneath routine, beneath familiarity, beneath the comfort of believing that nothing unusual is happening. Fontaine's death mattered only to him, because the system had already prepared his replacement. In this way, the underground facility becomes the physical embodiment of everything the film has been hinting at from the beginning. Control does not need to announce itself when it can simply reset the board. Fontaine's resurrection is not a miracle. It is proof that the cycle is artificial, and that breaking it will require more than survival. It will require awareness, disruption, and the courage to confront a truth that has been buried. Quite literally, beneath everyday life. Once the existence of the underground facility is revealed, the film shifts from asking what is happening to asking how it has been allowed to happen for so long. The answer is unsettling in its simplicity. Control does not come from constant surveillance alone, but from influence woven into the most ordinary parts of daily life. The lab does not rely on force or fear. It relies on routine, food, water, substances, and sound become tools so familiar that no one thinks to question them. What the characters slowly realize is that behavior is being guided long before any conscious decision is made. The things people consume are quietly shaping how they feel, how they react, and how they see one another. Meals are not just meals. Entertainment is not just entertainment. Even moments meant for comfort or escape are part of a larger design. The system works because it hides inside pleasure and habit, not punishment. This realization connects directly to the film's earlier themes of repetition and stagnation. If time feels frozen and lives keep resetting, it is because the inputs never change. When the same influences are delivered day after day, the outcomes become predictable. People stay distracted, emotionally dulled, or constantly on edge, not because they are incapable of change, but because their environment has been calibrated to keep them reactive rather than reflective. Music plays a particularly important role in this process. It moves through the neighborhood effortlessly, filling cars, stores, and living rooms. The film shows how sound can alter mood almost instantly, escalating tension or dissolving it without a single word spoken. This is not presented as coincidence, but as design. When people are surrounded by constant noise engineered to provoke emotion rather than thought, silence becomes uncomfortable, and introspection feels unnatural. Conflict becomes easier than reflection. Food and water operate in a similar way, though more subtly. They are consumed daily, trusted without question, and rarely examined beyond surface-level concerns. By embedding influence into these essentials, the system ensures constant exposure. Control does not arrive in dramatic doses. It accumulates slowly, shaping behavior over time until reactions feel instinctive rather than learned. People laugh, argue, or withdraw without understanding why, mistaking external influence for personal emotion. What makes this especially effective is that no one feels targeted. Everyone believes they are simply living their life, making their own choices, reacting naturally to the world around them. The film suggests that the most effective systems of control are the ones that convince people they are free. When influence is invisible, resistance becomes unfocused. There is no clear enemy, only a vague sense that something feels wrong. This approach reinforces the idea that the neighborhood's violence and dysfunction are not random. They are outcomes carefully sustained by environmental inputs. When people are kept distracted or emotionally volatile, unity becomes difficult. Energy is spent reacting instead of organizing, surviving instead of questioning. The system does not need to suppress awareness directly. It simply overwhelms it. By linking behavior to consumption, the film challenges the idea that personal responsibility exists in a vacuum. Choices are shaped by context, and context can be engineered. This does not remove agency, but it complicates it. Awareness becomes the first act of resistance, because recognizing the pattern breaks the illusion of randomness. In the larger narrative, the lab's use of food, water, substances, and music completes the picture of control hinted at from the beginning. Time repeats because influence repeats. Lives reset because environments remain unchanged. The system persists not because it is unstoppable, but because it is subtle. And once that subtlety is exposed, the film suggests that the most dangerous question is no longer who is in control, but how long has it been shaping us without our awareness? Among all the instruments of influence revealed in the film, music stands out because of how effortlessly it moves through people's lives. It requires no permission, no explanation, and no conscious attention. It plays in the background while people drive, work, argue, celebrate, and rest. In They Cloned Tyrone, music is not treated as decoration or atmosphere. It is treated as instruction, shaping emotional responses before thought has a chance to intervene. This idea fits seamlessly into the world the film has already established, where repetition and conditioning define everyday life. Just as food and water quietly influence the body, music moves directly into the mind. The characters do not question it because it feels personal, even intimate. People choose what they listen to, or at least believe they do. That belief is what makes music such an effective tool. Influence feels like preference, and conditioning feels like identity. The film illustrates this power in a way that is simple but deeply unsettling. When aggressive sounds fill the space, tension rises almost immediately. Movements become sharper, voices louder, emotions harder to control. When the music shifts, the energy shifts with it, as if a switch has been flipped. The change does not come from conversation or understanding, but from vibration and rhythm. The body reacts first, and the mind follows. This moment reinforces the larger theme that behavior is being guided, not commanded. No one tells the characters to feel angry or calm. The environment does it for them. Music becomes a shortcut to emotional states that would otherwise require personal experience or reflection. Over time, repeated exposure conditions people to respond predictably, making behavior easier to anticipate and manage. What makes this especially powerful is how familiar it feels. Music has always been tied to emotion, memory, and identity. The film does not invent this idea. It exposes how it can be exploited. When certain sounds are constantly associated with conflict, stress, or emotional calls, those states begin to feel normal. When calm or reflective music is rare or dismissed, stillness becomes uncomfortable. The system does not ban peace. It simply drowns it out. This connects back to the film's portrayal of a neighborhood trapped in cycles of tension and stagnation. If people are constantly emotionally charged, they remain reactive. Arguments escalate quickly. Distrust grows. Small conflicts turn into lasting divisions. Unity becomes difficult not because people do not want it, but because their emotional environment is never stable enough to support it. Music becomes an invisible divider, pushing people apart while appearing to bring them together. At the same time, the film suggests that this tool cuts both ways. The same mechanism used to provoke aggression can also restore calm. This duality is important. It shows that influence itself is not inherently harmful. It depends on intent and awareness. The danger lies in not realizing how deeply it operates. When people are unaware of how their emotional states are being shaped, they surrender control without noticing. By highlighting music's role, the film deepens its argument about subtle control. There is no need for constant supervision when emotions can be guided remotely. There is no need for overt force when internal states can be influenced at scale. Music becomes a way to tune a population, adjusting mood and behavior without leaving visible fingerprints. In the broader narrative, this realization ties together everything the film has been building toward. Time loops because emotions loop. Conflict persists because tension is continuously reinforced. Change feels impossible because the internal conditions required for it are never allowed to settle. By revealing music as a tool of control, They Cloned Tyrone invites viewers to listen more carefully, not just to the sounds around them, but to how those sounds shape their thoughts, reactions, and sense of self long before they realize it. When the film finally reveals the mastermind behind the experiment, it does not point to an unfamiliar villain or an outside force stepping in from the shadows. Instead, it turns inward. The architect of the system is an older version of Fontaine himself, and this revelation reframes everything that has come before. The cycles, the repetition, the emotional manipulation, and the carefully maintained stagnation are no longer just imposed from above. They are sustained from within. This twist ties directly into the film's ongoing meditation on time and repetition. Fontaine has been dying and waking up, over and over, unaware that another version of himself has already traveled the full arc of this world. The older Fontaine represents what happens when trauma is never resolved, only buried and allowed to harden. His transformation into the mastermind is not sudden or theatrical. It feels like the slow result of years spent internalizing pain, blame, and loss without relief. Rather than directing his anger outward toward the systems that shaped his suffering, the older Fontaine turns that anger inward. His solution is not liberation, but control. He believes that reshaping identity itself is the answer, that erasing what caused pain will also erase the pain. This belief becomes the foundation of the experiment. It is not fueled by hatred alone, but by exhaustion, grief, and the desire to escape a history that feels unbearable. The film uses this reveal to explore internalized racism without stating it outright. The older Fontaine's logic suggests that survival requires transformation into something more acceptable, more manageable, more distant from the identity that has been repeatedly harmed. In doing, he adopts the same thinking that has historically justified exclusion and erasure. The tragedy is that he believes he is fixing the problem, when in reality he is reproducing it in a more intimate form. This moment also connects back to the theme of cloning as repetition rather than creation. The older Fontaine does not build a new future. He recreates the same conditions again and again, hoping that refinement will succeed where understanding failed. Each clone is an attempt to perfect an outcome without confronting the root cause. Trauma becomes data, pain becomes input, and identity becomes something to be edited rather than healed. What makes this revelation especially unsettling is how quietly it fits into the story. There is no dramatic speech justifying every choice, no clear moral resolution. The film allows the audience to sit with the discomfort of realizing that harm does not always require an external enemy. Sometimes it grows from unresolved wounds, passed down and magnified over time. The system is monstrous not because it is inhuman, but because it is deeply human. By making Fontaine both victim and architect, the film refuses simple answers. It suggests that oppression is sustained not only by visible structures, but also by what those structures teach people to believe about themselves. When trauma goes unexamined, it can reshape values, distort intentions, and turn survival strategies into weapons against one's own community. This revelation brings the story full circle. The repetition of time, the manipulation of emotion, and the engineered environment all lead back to a single unresolved grief. The older Fontaine embodies the cost of never breaking the cycle, of choosing control over healing. His presence forces the audience to confront a difficult idea, that freedom cannot be engineered, and identity cannot be erased without consequence. In the end, the film does not present the older Fontaine as a monster to be easily dismissed. It presents him as a warning, a vision of what happens when pain is allowed to define purpose, when history is treated as a flaw rather than a truth to be confronted. Through him, They Cloned Tyrone argues that the most dangerous systems are not always imposed from the outside, but built slowly, patiently, from unresolved trauma that is never given the space to heal. As the story reaches its final moments, They Cloned Tyrone resists the comfort of a clean victory. The underground lab is exposed, chaos erupts, and the illusion of control is disrupted. But the film deliberately refuses to tell us that the system has been completely dismantled. Instead, it leaves us with something far more unsettling. The realization that systems like this do not disappear simply because one part of them collapses. They adapt. They retreat. And sometimes, they quietly continue in places we are no longer looking. The final scenes suggest that even after the truth surfaces, the cycle is still capable of repeating itself. Another version of Fontaine appears, moving through the same routine, surrounded by the same environment, unaware of what came before. This is not a twist meant to confuse, but a statement meant to linger. Liberation, the film argues, is not achieved by destroying a single lab, exposing one seeker, or defeating one antagonist. Those moments may spark change, but they are not enough on their own. What truly matters is awareness, and awareness cannot belong to one person alone. Throughout the film, no single character succeeds in isolation. Progress only begins when people start sharing information, questioning their surroundings, and acting together. The story quietly dismantles the idea of the lone hero riding in to save everyone else. Instead, it presents unity as the real threat to control. A system built on distraction and division struggles to survive once people begin to see themselves as connected rather than separate. The ending reinforces this idea through its tone rather than its dialogue. We see ordinary people helping one another, responding instinctively with care and cooperation instead of fear or confusion. These small acts matter. They suggest that resistance does not always look like rebellion. Sometimes it looks like solidarity, empathy, and collective responsibility. Change begins not with domination, but with alignment. By leaving the system partially intact, the film avoids offering false reassurance. It does not claim that awareness automatically leads to freedom. Instead, it frames awareness as the starting point, the first crack in a structure that relies on silence and isolation to function. Liberation, in this vision, is ongoing. It requires participation, vigilance, and the willingness to act together rather than wait for someone else to lead the way. In this sense, They Cloned Tyrone ends not as a conclusion, but as a question directed at the audience. If control thrives when people feel alone, distracted, or powerless, what happens when they no longer accept those conditions? What happens when communities recognize the patterns, share the knowledge, and refuse to move in isolation? That question is where the story leaves us, and it is what gives the film its lasting weight. Thank you for taking the time to explore this story and its deeper meanings. If you found this breakdown insightful and want to continue examining films and ideas that challenge the surface narrative, support the channel by liking the video, subscribing, and turning on notifications. Your engagement helps keep these conversations alive. And together, we can keep asking the questions that matter. We can keep asking the questions that matter.